First of all, I want to thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. You know, people are always curious what motivates somebody to try a life between lives regression. I wonder if you might share with us what made you decide to even try it.
Having had regression before, past life regression, I thought that it would be a more informative experience to go one step further to what would probably be the most complete form of regression, which would be life between life.
Okay. You know, some people have read books about, Michael Newton and his works, and other people have not. Is there anything you're comfortable sharing about what you experienced there in terms of, did you encounter anybody, that sort of thing? Or when I say anybody, it's not a person, obviously, but anything you're comfortable sharing about that part of it?
Yeah, I would preface that by saying that I meant to say previously that one of the things that had led me to this process is that I had read several works of Michael Newton, and the initiated pioneer of this process, and I was curious about knowing what it was like so that I can experience it myself and share it with other people in some of the other work that I do. In that process there, I did find quite a bit of similarity and correlation between the steps that Dr. Newton and his colleagues, etc., have outlined for the process there. For instance, the initial entry into the dimension of the other side was one where I experienced a greeting. After a brief cleansing, if you will, or bathing, if you will, quite brief, actually, there was a greeting, and I was led by a guide who I've determined or presumed to be, or was led to understand, was a master. I was led to a gathering of souls that I had known who had still yet been on the other side. And I was briefly greeted with the statement, if I recall correctly now, that he's back. He's back. And then I was introduced to them en masse, and I was told that we'll come back and we'll deal more with them in a little while individually, but you need to come with me, and we have some work to do. And I was led by this being to a space in the same area, but in a different portion of it, where we communed, we talked, we caught up, so to say, and I was briefly given some information about what was to come next.
Okay. What was that like, communicating on whatever level you did with your guide? What was that like, just the experience?
Well, obviously everyone should know and understand that it's purely telepathic. Obviously. It's unlike any human communication that you can recall or imagine, because there is a level of acceptance and understanding, and I guess you might call it love, or energy of peacefulness that comes about as a result of that, that is not something that you can feel in a human form. And there's no rush per se, or deadline, or agenda, or specific moment at which any given action or word or statement or process has to be given or shared. It's spontaneous, is the word I'm looking for. It's a spontaneous type of communication that allows for the acclimation and the adjustment to the moment and to the circumstance, the environment.
Okay. And aside from your guide, did you encounter anybody else aside from the souls in your soul group?
I did not encounter any directly, but I do recall that within the space that I could perceive, or if you want to use the term see, within that space I could see that there were many beings at work at many different tasks and groups and things like that, but not within the direct vision, if you will, but within the perception that you have. Because one thing that I noticed, or that I understood about that environment, is that what is in close proximity to you is what you perceive and what you interact with. But you're fully aware of what's going on around you to a certain degree. It's almost like being in outer space, and there's a panorama, a convex panorama, almost like an invisible wall or horizon that you can see in the distance as you can see more clearly defined objects and beings closer to you. But what's going on outside of your immediate presence is not exactly what your focus is. And that environment, incidentally, reminded me almost as if what you might, in general, without any specific direction or guidance or anything like that, the environment reminded me of the outer space environment, where it's black and white, but yet the canopy, if you will, around it is almost a gray, where I had experienced gray with light, a lot of white light, flickering white light in different degrees all over the place. And if I may share that the being who joined me and escorted me was a light being who had a figure or a form to him, almost of one in a robe with a hood, but that was only a form, but he emanated a golden white light, and that was his presence, that was his being. He didn't have a face, an image, a visage, or anything like that. He was light in the form of a being.
And I don't want you to share anything you're not comfortable sharing, but did you get you just might want to share whether you did or you didn't. Did you get any information about your current life now, without getting into detail?
Yes, there is an intention set before this process begins, and my intention was, what would be the intention of this lifetime? What was it that was intended or prescribed or agreed upon before this lifetime, and why has this lifetime been the way it was? And by virtue of this process and the skill of the regressionist and all of the other elements put together, I was able to glean that there is a purpose to this incarnation, what it is, and what's to be expected of it. And I share that and I say that because that is a general lesson for everyone who would be interested in a process like this, to know that if you ask, you will likely be told, and you will likely feel more adjusted to your present life circumstance by virtue of knowing not the specifics of it, but validating that, yes, that is the way that it works.
Is there anything you feel you'd like to share above and beyond what I've asked you so far about the process, about your experience?
I would say, in general, that it was probably the most profound experience that I've ever had in this field, or in this realm, or in this particular process. And that process being the one of attuning to some of the more alternative thoughts or beliefs or processes or understandings of how reality works and what the dimensions and interdimensional activity is like. It was definitely a high point, and probably, without a doubt, the most profound experience because of the nature of it, first of all, but second of all, progressively, cumulatively, throughout the process, it just became more and more profound. And then when you withdraw from it and you contemplate it subsequently, you begin to understand more and more the depth of it, and more the intensity of it, and the more that you correlate to what you already know, the more you validate the whole process, and then your whole existence seems to make a lot more sense.
Tell me about the actual experience itself. And what I mean by that is, people are always curious about, what's it like to be in that state, to have that experience, just physically. And whatever you want to share, tell us about your experience when you physically, and maybe even emotionally, as you experience the light between lives regression.
Well, the hypnotic portion of it was very calming. It was very relaxing, and physically the feeling was one of security. It was one of being in a comfortable place. Okay. And the regressionist himself was very competent and very experienced, so that made the process even a lot more comforting to start with.
Okay.
Other than the physical, it's very difficult to describe the actual mental state, if you will call it that, or the psychic state, psychological state. But it's one of detachment, yet your consciousness is still here, but you can feel that it's not fully attuned with the present real-time reality.
Okay. Okay. There are different parts to the light between lives regression. Typically, anyway. I shouldn't say always, but typically. One of the first things people normally experience is the experience in the womb, in utero. Whatever you're comfortable sharing, tell us about that experience for you, that portion of it.
It was probably on a par with the most profound portion of the regression. That being aside from the actual life between life. It's difficult to assess which one of the two was more profound, but as to that, to have the experience of being pure consciousness, almost floating in and around a uterus, is something that I would imagine that most people cannot even conceive of. But once you can conceive of it and understand it, and then find yourself, or you find your consciousness in that space, it's something that words can't describe.
Okay. And again, I want to make sure to honor whatever it is you want to share or not share about the experience, but if you're comfortable with it, or tell us about the experience of being in the womb as best you can. I don't mean physically, but maybe things that you might have experienced or noticed in that space that you're comfortable sharing. Maybe related to your mother, or whatever you're comfortable sharing.
You realize that you are initially in that phase, not yet fully merged with the physical being. And when you realize that, you go through the process of entering, first of all, into the physical dimension. Secondly, you enter into the physical vehicle of the womb. And thirdly, the most telling part of that whole experience is the process of merging the consciousness into the physical vehicle of the embryo. It's something that you cannot imagine until you actually experience it, and it's something that even in retrospect is difficult to describe, because we don't have the words to really project what that is like. It's more the type of thing where you have to experience it, and I would recommend to anyone who's interested in this process to definitely experience it, because that's the way that you will comprehend it and own it.
Okay. Another aspect to this process is the past life regression portion of it. Whatever you want to share about that part of the process. People are always curious about that, but tell us anything you'd like to share.
I have been in the past life regression process before this session, before this particular process. So I was slightly familiar with it from recollection and experience. This was a little bit different, because this came as a result of the entire regression process here. So it was step by step by step. In this case, it put that past life experience into context, whereas the previous times that I've experienced that, it was an isolated incident almost, or an isolated moment that was out of context and had no continuity to a previous life or before that life or subsequent life, that being this one.
Okay. All right. And after the past life regression, you moved on to the life between life space, right?
Yes.
You know, there's a number of different things you experienced there, but just share with whatever you're comfortable sharing about that space, that part of the regression.
If I recall correctly, that segment of the regression was the longest in real time during the whole process, in my case anyway. It was the longest in real time, but it didn't seem like a long time in and of itself, if that makes any sense. However, I will say that it's not just the life between life portion of it that's significant. It's the passing of the previous life. It's the transition from the physical to the non-physical, entering into the space or dimension of where life between life exists, and then the experience of going through that process in a condensed form.
Thank you for taking the time to do this. I really do appreciate it.
Quite welcome. Thank you.